Hello again. Let's take just one last selfie and sit down and listen to Ivan Žalac, who, well, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here because he's one of the co-founders of this whole portal initiative. In his free time, round of applause. In his free time, he's also a DevOps engineer. So he came to Krakow to open your minds and tell you a little bit about using design elements consciously. And Mick is yours.
Hello, everyone. So I imagine most of you here have built a Larp, designed a Larp, wrote a Larp, helped do so, or perhaps are planning to do so in some sort of a future. But before you even start a Larp, or start doing a Larp, have you ever wondered why are you doing it? Is there a question for you that's better than, oh, I just want to do a Larp? Is it just, I want to have fun? Or do you have some other reasons why you might want to build a Larp? So, during this presentation, I will be asking several questions. These are not the questions for you to answer immediately. You can ask me afterwards. But those are the questions for yourselves to think about it, to think about how would you do some stuff like that. So, let's start. What do you intend to accomplish and how are we going to do this? So, we could say this. There is a nice quote. Do you know who wrote it originally? I just invented it because it looks cool, so it was me, but it's a nice inspirational something to get your attention. But it also has a kernel of truth. So all of our ideas, basically, that we have about Larp and about everything else, are colored by our own perception. The first Larp you attended was a Larp that burned itself in your mind. The design of that Larp is how you at least started seeing other Larps, comparing your Larp to those Larps. So this influence can set you in a state of a default, your default way of thinking. How do you break out of it? Well, there is some stuff. For example, the very popular Nordic model often uses this sort of mixing desk of Larp, where you have different ideas like communication style, pressure on players, bleed in, player motivation, etc. That you can, it presents it as sliders that you can slide up or down to do one type of Larp or the other. This is a great model for building your own Larps, actually. You can Google it, the mixing desk of Larp. It's a Nordic Larp wiki. Get it? But I will not be talking about this. I will mostly be deconstructing everything about it. So you can see, so we can see what's beyond. Let's talk about some general Larp design factors or elements. There is no theory. Basically, I wrote this, but this mirrors the effect about how I think about Larps. So, when you design a Larp, you have several external factors that decide your Larp and the experience of the players themselves. So, as for the external factors, you have location and props, where you play your Larp, and everything the players interact with. You have settings, story, character bias, the story that you either wrote for your players, or in some Larps, players wrote some or most of it themselves. You have the rules of your Larp. So perhaps there are some lightweight rules, which are only safety rules and just player weight. Perhaps there are heavyweight rule sets of several hundred pages. There's that. And there is structure. For example, the time structure, or how the players interact with the elements of your Larp, how the story comes into play, how it clashes, how do you think about time in your Larp. but there are also internal factors that make every LARP, which are what players themselves felt, and how and why. So, if we go a bit into some design consideration about location and props, we could do big budget LARPs, big expensive locations, big budget. So, big budget props, costuming. It looks great. It looks shiny. It looks fantastic on the photos. It draws in players from everywhere. It draws in press, maybe, perhaps. But it's significantly harder to organize than, say, low prop LARP, low financial effort LARP. And it makes it a bit less accessible. If one LARP is free, the other is a 300 or 500 euro ticket. So, yeah. So, how would you like to balance it? And why? Are you making a LARP that looks good? Are you making a LARP for people to feel involved? One thing, there are no wrong answers here. How would you like to design the LARP? Think about it for yourselves. And why? Would you prefer doing big budget stuff or low budget stuff? Both is LARP. Both is equally valid in this. About settings, story, and character bios. So we could break down this to world lore if it's different from regular world. Some LARPs are just happening in the regular world. There's faction lore. Sometimes it's built by organizers, sometimes by players. Character histories as well. Relationships. Do you get pre-written relationships or do you build them? Personal tasks or goals. Are those an element of your LARP that you built? Are those something that the player has to come with themselves? Are there any story events that the organizers will do? How will you do them? Will you involve NPCs? Will you involve set events? But basically, this is pretty much about kickstarting the plots and conflicts central to the LARP that have to deal with character interaction. But what happens after? The main rule, safety rules are a must. Whatever you do a LARP with safety rules. We have some examples of other non-safety rules, which we call mechanical rules, like to involve LARP mechanics, like fighting or casting spells or something like that. If that is a part of your LARP, we can do it like it doesn't exist, so basically purely what you see is what you get. We can do the symbolical type, which is common, say, in many German fantasy LARPs, where you can, it's almost the same, but you can sometimes portray like you're swinging a heavy weapon, so when it hits it could hurt more. You have a big fan that is a component of your wind spell, so you wave a fan at your opponents and they get blown back because you do some theatrics. So it's mostly what you see is what you get, but you play along with the others. You can have LARPs with few mechanical rules, like let's say most of the Southeastern Europe LARPs would have. You could have a rules-heavy system, which you will mostly find in the United States. But what are advantages and disadvantages of these? Let me ask you that. Both, every choice you make, there is no wrong or right answer here. Every choice you make here will have consequences. For example, most people from more Nordic playing styles would prefer to play with very few mechanical rules. But let's say you make it big as a LARP designer, and let's say one day you get an email or a phone call from Wizards of the Coast. They want you to port Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition to LARP, but it has to cover all the mechanics. Everything you can do in 5th edition, you would also have to do in a LARP. How would you do it? The only answer here is write a rules-heavy system that's nearly as heavy. Of course, you could have a zero rules Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition LARP, let's say about a party of adventurers starting a tavern brawl somewhere, It will also be a Dungeons and Dragons, but it will cover only one part of those. This is also one of the ways how you can adapt, say, some IP to a rules light system. Just focus on one small part of it and make this your experience. You can do it like that. It's one of the ways you can do it. So if we go forward, we can talk about structure, which I said early. Time-based structures. Of course, every LARP has sort of an ending. Are they somehow divided into acts, days? Do these have any mechanical reset periods? So you, for example, can you cast only 2 spells a day, or can you only do it, or do you have any such restrictions, or do you have different things that happen on different days or different time periods? Do you have a timeline? But this is not the only way to structure LARPs. You could also have location-triggered events or quest hubs. For example, the US fantasy LARPs typically tend to have a tavern, and you can go to a tavern and ask for some quests. They have several listed. You choose one of those and tell the organizers, and then they go and build that quest especially for you. You go and play in an instanced part of the woods or something. We could say that. So you could have location triggered events. So for example, you have a big forest and you have NPCs waiting at some spot. So when something comes, something happens. But these are all just fantasy examples, but because I assume most of you are primarily familiar with fantasy LARPs of one style or another, but this can also be applied to every other LARP. How do you design structure? Is it time-based? Is it location-based? And why do you combine those two? You can do the same. You can do that. But let's go back. External factors sell your LARP. You will sell your LARP easily if it looks epic, if it has nice or adequate looks, props, and everything. And furthermore, all those external factors, not just including costs and everything, they also provide a common framework when people talk about your LARP. So, oh yeah, we went over that hill. These are all the external factors. They're a common point of reference, as well as your design consideration. But internal factors, on the other hand, is how the LARP itself makes you feel. So everything I just said, let's go and revisit it. What do you want your players to feel while playing the LARP? Well, there is a classical 6 basic emotions. There are some other classifications that have less or usually more. So let's say happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. How would anything that you do about your LARP, any mechanical decision, any story decision, what will it trigger? What do you think? Especially when writing the LARP, how does a written quest trigger one of these? And these, let me tell you, are actually a major factor in how players themselves process and experience LARPs. Because unlike other forms of art and entertainment, LARPs use all of your senses: your sight, your hearing, your scent, your touch, and your feelings. Sometimes your taste. But how they feel, actually, for some LARPs, it starts with when they get characters before the LARP, when they start thinking, designing their costumes. But for most, the LARP really starts at briefing. So, when you're building your LARPs, when you're designing your LARPs, always cover safety. And I'm repeating this because it's incredibly important. But LARP briefings are also good ways to sneak in some elements of your LARP design to communicate with players what you might be trying to accomplish. So you can do stuff like teamwork exercises to break the ice, because when you get a bunch of strangers together, they're usually uncomfortable. So you can do like play the stupid penguin games together, and they all laugh, and you suddenly feel much more comfortable with each other. And you could split them up in teams and have the teams themselves do stuff apart from other players. So if you do that, then the players inside those teams will feel bonded much more than the players who are outside their teams. Oh yes, but we are playing team building football together. You were not part of that. You do not know our internal jokes. You are a stranger, an outsider to us. You can get that if you focus your teamwork, team building exercises, or camp building does it as well for fantasy LARPs, which include camp building, combat training, and other activities, perhaps. Every activity that you do together helps bond people. But during the briefing, you can also explore the techniques you will use and get a head start of what you want your players to feel. So, yes, do as much as you can, as well as you can in the time you have for your briefing and workshops, because these are important. Now, for something that's may be a bit more controversial, location and props have no intrinsic values. Apart from marketing and photos, that is. What matters is how they affect your LARP. It doesn't matter that you are having a cool castle to play in, unless it makes players say, wow, what a cool castle to play in. It matters if you get cool photos from the cool castle you were playing on. Then it matters. But you are looking at the effect, not the cause, as the main value of those location and props. You can have a nice castle, but if you're doing a modern family drama, it doesn't work that well. So a location should suit the LARP. You can do it expensive, you can do it poor, but make sure it's suitable for the LARP itself. Consider the LARP themes. If you're going for full 360 illusion, does the location suit that? Do the props suit that? Whether you're going or not going is also your decision as a designer. Both choices have some merits and demerits. Does the space reflect the feelings you want your players to have? If you want your players to feel dark and brooding, do you put them in a well-lit pink and purple room? No, not really. You put them in a dark place, some basement or something like that. If you can affect the design, but you want to try having the environments and props match what you people want to have. Is it airy enough, free enough, or oppressive enough? Lights, scents, temperature, terrain, weather forecast if outdoors. These all affect how players will process your LARP and how everything you built will be processed by them. How will the players move through space? What interactions will they have? Do you have 2 rooms and something interesting that can happen on the corridor, which you believe will be frequently visited? That's also important. Do you set your camps so that they have little interaction or that they have a lot of interaction? Do you do tight space, wide space? It's up to you. How will they use the props? What's important? Why is it important? The story itself is also a lie. We all know the LARP story is a lie, but we pretend it's real because, yes, of course, it's LARP. However, what the story itself stirs in us is true and very individual. It comes to the ideas of LARP bleed. But how will any story you want to say how will any story say what you want is secondary. More importantly, how will the story do what you want? What reactions the players will have? The LARP story is not a novel. It's not a precious precious drop of water to be held in your palms that you might lose forever. It's not a novel. It's not it's not a show. It's not a sacred cow. Whatever you write will not survive the LARP. Will not survive the players. It will always get modified by players and experienced by different players differently, individually. This is something that you cannot really predict, but you can design on how do you want the story to influence the players, how do you want to make them feel towards themselves, towards each other, or towards the story. You can be subtle if you want to, but clarity is often better because a lot of subtlety tends to go over people's heads. In general, you can put some in, you can put some fun stuff for people to find. That's always fun, but in general, you usually want to be as direct as possible. And always think about, however, what you write in the story, whether it's a world story or individual story, will be interpreted, internalized by players. And how will it make them feel? So, rules and structure are actually more than they seem. You may see, oh, it's a timetable, but how will each mechanical rule interact with your LARP and your players? How would the play look with them or without them? Will it bring any imbalances? How would it look without them? Some props, rituals, etc. can work the same as mechanics for that purpose. And while time and location structure influences plot, there are also great points where you can introduce or relieve tensions or do other effects on their play. Because some LARPs, the LARP starts and some stuff happens and they dial up intensity up to the 11 and then they just leave it there until the end of the LARP. But it's usually, I will not say better, because that's also individual, but it's usually more realistic to how a human works if you have your ups and downs, your regular story structure, moments of high intensity, but also moments of joy that allows players to unwind, get out of panic mode. And you can manipulate all that time stuff depending on how you do it. And of course, a debrief at the end helps. So, let's do some more sayings. You may consider mechanics or structure of a LARP foreign to you to be good or bad, but it doesn't matter. There are tools in designer's toolbox. There is a reason why they're used. Are the rule light LARPs better or worse than rule heavy LARPs is a wrong question. It's like you're asking, is a hammer better than a saw? They serve their purpose and they do it differently. Both are tools, but let's go further. Mysteries for the very active players. You can always do that, because some players will have the ideas that something might have happened. Something else might be going on. So they will go above and beyond. So have you noticed how many mistakes did I make so far? Has anyone kept count? I'm just curious. Some of you might have. Maybe it means something. Maybe I'm announcing a new LARP in secret, if you just could crack the code. So whether you design something like that intentionally or not, someone might try to find something that is or is not there. Think about it. Design for it, plan for it, or not. What's your plan B if something goes wrong here? So, design example. What's an information? Let's consider this sentence, everyone. Franco killed Bella. What is this information? Is it something that's set in stone? An immutable truth within the world of your creation. If I say Franco killed Bella, did that really happen? But Why did it happen? Was he justified, or is he just a cold-blooded murderer? Or perhaps what I said is just a lie, spread by a malicious person or group. Or perhaps a righteous group, hoping some good things will come out of it. Is it perhaps not something that everyone knows, but maybe a rumor only some have heard, or something that people just think might have happened? Or something that might not have happened, but people formed a religion around it, and now it's a blasphemy to say that Franco did not kill Bella because their sacred life develops around it. So, whenever you give some new information, think about the voice in which you give them in, about the certainty and the circumstances. Everything you say has circumstances. But even are such stuff even necessary to define whether it's true or not? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on your LARP and what do you do. So, to bring us to our summary, if we could just do one sentence about it all. Characters do stuff, but players themselves feel the effects due to bleed. And yeah, I'm talking about emotional bleed, not the one using sharp objects. So, any questions? We're done. Yes, Christos.
When you're talking about intent, are you talking about more of intent in the sense of using LARP as a tool in a greater scheme of things, or intent more as a creative intent within the context of LARP as art, basically to be enjoyed as entertainment and art?
I'm talking here mostly about creative intent, but it can also be used in other ways, like a political intent or educational intent. I'm talking about it basically just as an intent, how to make LARP do what you want it to do, whether it's for fun, art, education, politics. There are no wrong answers here. It's just about how do you want to build this, basically. Any more questions? All right. Thank you, everyone.